First of all, the benefits. Everybody wants to know what I gain from going hybrid.
If you have just one person remote in a meeting, then you need to make sure that the entire meeting is considered a remote meeting.
You could adapt the metaverse. I think that could be extremely cool, but I think it depends on your culture, it depends on the business you're in, the industry.
I think one of the basics that you need is just trust.
Yeah.
You need to make sure the people you hire into your team are persons you can trust and that you feel you can count on.
Hi, and welcome to this webinar, which is a beginner's guide to going hybrid or to working hybrid. Maybe you've already started working hybrid. Maybe you haven't started yet. Maybe you tried, but you haven't nailed it completely. Today, we're going to give you some tools to finding a way to working hybrid in the best way possible. With me today, I have Anna. Myself, I'm Gertrud. I am the International Project Manager here at Pronestor. I will be representing the employees side. But before we go to you, Anna, I'm just going to tell you that there is a chat function for you. So you can write questions along the way during the webinar. We will answer the questions in the end. Sorry.
Yes, hi, my name is Anna, as you said. I'm Commercial Product Director, and as I'm part of the management team, I'll be representing, let's say, the management angle on this hybrid setup today. And I think it's safe to say that during the past 6 months, we've seen more and more companies and employees actually returning to their offices in a more or less hybrid setup and maybe just getting started on it. And during the past few webinars we've held, we've actually talked about how companies can go hybrid. We've talked a bit about the different scheduling strategies you can use when you go hybrid. And we've also talked about how not getting hybrid right can be quite an issue even for larger organizations. And just to try to sum all of this up, we've decided to create this beginner's guide to help you get it right, whether you're a company or an employee.
So the points we're going to go through this webinar is, first of all, the benefits. Everybody wants to know what I gain from going hybrid. Then it's what we call the hard angle or the practical needs. And then we have the human angle or the more soft needs. Before we start, let me just try to define for you how we see hybrid, remote, and flexible work. First of all, hybrid work is when you choose to work from wherever you want. Then you have remote work. It could be that your company is completely remote. You don't even have an office, maybe. And then lastly, we have the flexible work where you can choose to work whenever you want. So there's 3 different categories. Well, when we went into the hybrid mode, Anna, you were actually my manager at that point. I think what kicked off this entire thing was a pandemic. I think that counts for a lot of companies out there. Yes. It was a big interference in the way that we work. And me as an employee, I had my thoughts on it. But you as a manager, what went through your mind when Denmark went into a lockdown?
Yes. In the first lockdown, I think I was just hit by general shock, and I think most people were actually, because everything was so uncertain and no one knew what was going to happen either professionally or personally on a private level. And so my first impulse was to make sure that you, as part of the team and the rest of the team, had all the things you needed at home to create a proper workstation, because that wasn't really, we weren't used to having that in our homes. And as soon as we had the practicalities in place, then we had to consider, okay, we're used to having team meetings in a certain way, but that won't work for us in a remote setup or hybrid setup. So how could we actually create these team meetings and make sure that we still had a good status on each other every day or more or less? And then also remember to keep the social contact, so we didn't just talk about work when we were in contact with each other. And I discovered soon that the one-on-ones that we used to have, or that we have, are extremely important, because you need those to get a feel of the specific employee and make sure that they are thriving actually in a difficult setup. And Gertrude, you were my employee.
Yeah. What did I feel?
Yes, exactly. How did you feel when you were just forced to work from home from one day to the other?
I loved it. I simply loved it. I still do. I mean, there are some things that have changed along the way, but I loved it. But I must admit that I realized that many of my colleagues didn't love it as much as I did. And when we started going back to the office, we were maybe 50% staff in the office. It felt like we were sitting miles apart. What I used to see when I came into the office was a full circle of people, and now I was just there, felt like I was all alone, even though I wasn't. But coming into the office, was because I wanted to collaborate. I needed the informal conversation with my colleagues. I needed to use the facilities. But I think when we tested it off a little bit and made some adjustments, I think we landed in a really good place. I think what we have now really works well.
I'm really happy to hear that, because this will actually get me to the first item of the agenda, which is the benefits of the hybrid setup. And as you say, you think it works well. And I think from our perspective as management team, one of the most important things here is actually to use this hybrid setup to make sure that we have happy employees. That is the number one reason. But then as a company, it actually also enables us to attract good and relevant employees from other countries, which wasn't an option before. And we've actually also managed to keep some employees who chose to move far away, but they can still work from us in a remote setup. Then if you look on a bit more the financial side, if you reduce your office size, then you actually have some quite significant savings you can do also. And then one of the reasons I really like as well is that we minimize our carbon footprint.
Yeah. From an employee perspective, I think my biggest benefit is the flexibility it gives me. I can choose to work from home when I have tasks that I need to focus on, and I can choose to come into the office if I need collaboration or to use the office facilities. The environmental impact, of course, is a big thing for me as well. I think it is for many people. So knowing that I'm part of reducing the carbon footprint makes me really happy. Then we have the fact that I'm not wasting time getting to the office. It leaves more time for either working or for spending time with my family. Yes. And overall, I think that's a full work-life balance it gives me.
Exactly. I think that goes for management as well,
not
only employees. But based on our experiences that we've done during the past few years, we've put together this list of what we could call our best tips.
Yeah, this is what I mentioned before. We've divided them into the hard values or the practical needs, and then the softer values or the more human angle. What I've written down here is policies and procedures, and I actually think you should start with that, Anna.
Yes, that is a very management thing to do.
It is.
But I think I would like to, the first thing to say is that please don't expect to get this right from the get-go or from the start, because no one really does. I think this is something that requires some effort. But a good place to start is actually looking at what benefits or which benefits you hope to achieve by creating a hybrid setup. Once you have that list of benefits as a management team, then you need to make sure that you create the processes and procedures that support these benefits. Once you're there, you would start to look into the preparations you need to do from a hardware perspective, which means make sure that you have the right equipment in your meeting rooms and for the hybrid setup. And then you need to also get an overview of the different profiles you have in your team or in your organization to see how they could best thrive in this setup. This would all actually make up what we could call your hybrid maturity. So as a company, how ready are you to go hybrid? And then start off in the speed that would suit you, and make sure that you remember all the tasks and the profiles that you have to consider for this. Then you have the carbon footprint, as we mentioned before, which is an easy one that you receive on the transportation. But then you can also start looking into having a hybrid setup would actually also allow you to make a mix between hybrid employees and remote employees. So Gertrud, I know you've worked with quite a few clients who were in very different time zones from you. And what are your experiences in making this work?
Yeah, well, I started with this way before we started with this hybrid work model. And I think it's easy to say that it doesn't come easy necessarily. You have to plan ahead, you have to communicate, and you have to understand each other's needs when you're working 8+ hours apart. It's not necessarily just simple. You have to compromise as well. But listening to each other and planning ahead, I think makes a big effort on this, or makes a big difference on this. Another thing is when you're hiring
remote
employees, or just when you're hiring remote employees, think about having your employees in the same time zone. It makes a lot of things more yeah, it's just easier in general. But if you decide to hire outside of your own time zone, see if there is a chance to actually have some overlapping working hours, so you know that you're actually focusing on something at the same time, so you can reach out to each other. It could be once or twice a week. It just makes really good sense for collaboration in general.
So the hybrid and remote meetings.
Oh yeah, sorry. So yeah, when we're talking about this hybrid and remote meetings, when I'm an employee who's not in the office, what should I expect?
Well, first of all, I need to say that if you have just one person remote in a meeting, then you need to make sure that the entire meeting is considered a remote meeting and it has to function properly. So in the meeting rooms, you need to have, as we mentioned before, the hardware, so proper microphones, you need cameras, you need to make sure that you have screen sharing capabilities. And then when you're actually inviting people or participants for the meeting, consider what kind of meeting you are inviting them for. So make sure that you align your expectations to their participation and make sure to communicate that to them. So if you're having like a brainstorming meeting and you can imagine that people will come in and go crazy on a whiteboard, make sure to communicate this in proper time so they can prepare on their own.
And leading from that, I think timing is of essence, especially when you're coming into the office. When should I come into the office? Focusing on the remote meeting is of course important, but when I come into the office as an employee, what should I then be aware of, or what can I expect?
Well, I think you need to consider that this is actually a two-way street. So we are giving you, from the management perspective, a lot of flexibility that makes your life maybe a bit easier to get through. And then we might use this to actually reduce your office size, because that is also an advantage for the management. That means if you expect to just pop into the office on a short notice, you can risk that all the desks are booked and used by someone else. So you need to prepare a bit. Otherwise, consider maybe meeting up with colleagues in a cafe just to have a change of scenery. So you need to remember that this flexibility that we all gain also comes with, should we say, a cost, or at least a demand that you need to plan your time and you need to plan your work days in advance.
So what I'm hearing you say is we need to be ready to adapt, which is actually the last point of this, but being ready to adapt, what is in that as well?
Exactly. As we've mentioned before, we've had quite a few takes on this hybrid setup and how to get it to work properly for everybody. And even though we have a good working model today, it might not be the right one in a year or in 2 years. So we can't just set it in stone and see this is the way we work from now on. So in our management team, at least, on every management meeting that we have one fixed item on the agenda, which is the status of our hybrid setup. So how are you as employees doing? How are we doing on the management side? And how's the company doing? You need to consider this and then be ready to make some small changes or adaptations to make it work.
So these were our practical points. Let me just list them for you. I think we'll have them right here. So we have policies and procedures. We have the reduce of carbon footprint. We have the mixing of hybrid and full remote hires. Then we have the hybrid meetings that needs to be seen as remote meetings. And then we have timing, which is very important. And last but not least, being ready to adapt. If we go over to the more soft side, the human angle, what I have written here is something about talking to your employee. I think it goes both ways, but from a management's perspective, you have to talk to us. What do you have to talk to us about?
Well, we need to consider that and acknowledge that both employees and managers are very different profiles, and different profiles have different needs or preferred ways of working. So some people prefer to work in a very loud environment, going to the office, having a lot of people around them because they actually get energy from this, while others find it rather draining maybe and prefer to stay at home in quiet surroundings, because that's where they focus the best. So you need to have that overview of your team, as I mentioned before as well. And then you need to have a remote first mindset. So that is actually leading a bit back to both the way you handle your meetings and making sure that you have all the capabilities in the office and at home to have these remote meetings, because this is also an important way to not favor the in-office employees and making sure that you have equal terms for everybody. And I know actually, Gertrud, in your team, you have some quite specific rules on how you attend or conduct a remote meeting.
Yeah, we've been testing it for a few years now. So we've found some rules that really work well. And the first one is always keeping the camera on when you're remote, and also if you're in the office, but having a meeting with your laptop on. It makes it so much easier to see facial expressions and understanding each other, as well as it keeps a focus on what is happening. And that actually leads me to my next thing. When you are working or having a meeting with people from other sites,
you lost track of it.
I did. I'm so sorry.
You need to focus on the meeting and not on other things.
That's the thing.
Yes.
I need to focus on what I'm doing here. Yeah, I need to focus on the meeting. So don't sit with your phone. Don't participate as well as you would if it had been a physical meeting. Which leads me to my third point that you also mentioned. As soon as one person is attending remotely, everybody has to pay attention to this remote setup. So making sure that we look at the screen, interact, and just participate in general, all of us together.
Include the ones that are remote.
Yeah, that shouldn't feel isolated.
No,
just because they're sitting somewhere else.
Which again, cleverly enough, leads me to the next point, which is being hybrid and also being social. Because one thing is adapting your meetings and your entire way of working to a hybrid setup. But what about the social interaction that you don't have if you're working remotely or often working from home? What do you think about? How have you seen that in our organization? Or what do you think of it? The social setup.
The social setup?
Social kind of things.
Oh.
Metaverse?
I'm simply not here today. I'm so sorry. Okay. I think when you have a hybrid company, what you could do, as you just mentioned, you could adapt the metaverse. I think that could be extremely cool, but I think it depends on your culture, it depends on the business you're in, the industry. So if you're not going that way, I think having social interactions a few times per year where everybody gets to meet face to face makes really good sense. And I think offices that are already remote and have been that for years are doing that maybe every year to make sure that people have these little social gatherings as well. And then what we've done is have these regular status meetings. We have info meetings for the entire company where everybody is either present or attending or participating remotely. Yeah,
that's cool. And then you also need to consider that some employees may be at a stage in their employment where they need the office more than others. So if you have relatively young employees who are in their first full-time job, or you have new hires who are just coming into the company, they might need have a greater need for interaction with their managers, with their team, across the organization, because they have different stakeholders. So you need to accommodate that they have actually the option of going to the office. And then some people, like me, have a very small home, and we don't really have the option of creating a home office because we don't have the room for it. So I prefer to go into the office as well, because I have a very good setup here, which makes me more efficient and it's easier for me to work. And then you might have some with some quite specific physical needs that makes them preferring either going to the office or working from home, because that's just the way they can work the best.
Yeah. I think the next point here is then over communication. That's at least what I've called it. Making sure that everybody knows what everybody's doing. So Anna, when you were my manager, you weren't a micromanager. I'm not. I think you still aren't. But there are some micromanagers, and they need a different way of having an idea of what their employees are doing. And also within the team, there could be people who need more understanding of what is happening with the other teammates. So making sure that your calendar is up to date, making sure that whatever tools you use, project management of whatever, is up to date, making sure that everybody can actually see what is happening throughout your day, that you're getting your tasks done, makes it so much easier to collaborate. And also having these daily stand-ups, as I mentioned before, where you just discuss what you have on your plate. Again, help each other out. This can help a micromanager, it can help people in a team who have these needs. So listen to each other, just keep track of it helps people keep track of each other.
And I think from a management perspective, now you mentioned the micromanagement type, but for all managers, the the communication is really, really important, because you need to make sure that you have a clear communication. So what do I expect from others? And also, what can others expect from me when we're working in a hybrid setup? When will I get back to you? When will I do things? And then you can consider doing as we're doing. We're using actually our own tool in this company to plan our work week. So every week we have to go in and set our presence for the coming week to let our colleagues know if we'll be in the office, working remotely, having a day off, or something else. And then, again, from a management perspective, I think one of the basics that you need is just trust. You need to make sure the people you hire into your team are persons you can trust and that you feel you can count on.
Is that why you're no longer my manager?
No. Okay, other reasons.
So what I'm hearing you say is actually be ready for change.
Yes, exactly. Because as we've mentioned before, we've tried some different setups and we didn't really nail it the first time. You really need a few tries. So yes, you can't expect that. And it would take time typically to find the right constellation. And while hybrid work is giving the individual more power over their own scheduling, then you also need to be aware of what your colleagues need. So your needs are important, but you also need to consider the ones around you and what they need.
Yeah. That's very important. Yeah, I'll let me just sum up. So what we conclude here is that working hybrid in a hybrid environment has obvious benefits for both employee and management, but it also requires effort from everyone. So everything about adapting, figuring it out, testing along the way, and talking to each other is so important. But the tips that we just mentioned, they're here on the screen for the soft angle. So involve your employees. Think remote first. Hybrid and social is very important when you have a hybrid setup. Over communication and be ready for changes. Be ready to adapt in general. Yeah. I think we have the other points as well that we mentioned before. They are right here, so you can see them alongside each other. So we have the hard angle and the softer angle. This was actually more or less it for today. I think that if you have any questions, you can please type them in and we will answer them. Before I get to the questions, I can see we have 2 already. Let me just tell you that you can always contact us if you want to learn more, just want to discuss this matter with us, because we call ourselves experts, but you might have some criticism on that. Please bring it forward.
Takes on it.
Other takes, yeah.
So we have the first question: it sounds very good with hybrid work, and what are our thoughts and ideas on convincing a manager to try it out if he or she doesn't support it? Well, I think it's important that you actually try to see what is the issues and why is he or she uncomfortable or unsure of the hybrid setup, and then make sure that you use some of these points about, I think, especially the communication and how you can make him or her aware of what you're doing, that you're still completing your tasks and doing what you should, even though you're working from
and also take it in smaller steps. So start by saying, let's just try this 1 day a week or 1 day every second week to test it out and see what works. I mean, it could be a micromanager. You want to make sure that they feel well informed about what is happening in their team. Okay, so the second question has come in. What about all the space and desks when we are not too many in the office at the same time? We are approximately 60-70% in the office. It can feel a bit empty. Do you have any recommendations?
Well, I think from a management perspective and the financial angle, one of the first thoughts that come to mind is actually it's an option to maybe rent out a little bit of your office space, and in that way just add a bit to your turnover.
Yeah, so push the take away some desks and put people in smaller groups, and then rent out.
Yes.
I mean, what we can also do, like what we've done here at least, is that we have taken some of that space and used it for collaboration spaces or social spaces. So we have integrated a little bar, but we have also sofa area, things like that, where we can hang out and have these more informal meetings.
Yes, I think that's important. I think we might have another question coming up here, but I think you're right. You can either rent it out, but you can also use it to create some sort of different working environment, which isn't focused on people sitting at desks or in meeting rooms. You can accommodate the informal meetings, as you said, where people just have a quick chat, discuss something, find an agreement, and then they can go back to their office again.
And having these great facilities will make people come to the office. I mean, we have ping pong table, we have racer cars, but yeah, having these things like will get people to come to the office. Okay.
So,
what do you think about Elon Musk's take on bringing back Twitter employees to the office space? He thinks that he needs to oversee the work from nearby, and colleagues need to work physically close in order to create the best work environment.
That's a difficult one, honestly. From my perspective, both as an employer and as a manager, I must say I don't really agree, honestly. But I don't know how they work at Twitter, so I can't really talk about the specific needs that they have. But I think, again, I'm very, very much into trusting people, and that you are actually grown-ups who can see when do I need to go to the office, and when is it okay to work from home, depending on the tasks that you're solving. So I would say that freedom is a way also of getting people to do their best and their utmost in the office.
Yeah, I think trust goes along. I think people who have kids can say that as well. If you put trust into your kids, they will act better than if you don't. I think if you're too strict. I also think what we have here is a situation where people might not want to come back because they actually realize that they have this time that I was talking about before, going to the office, spending 30 minutes or 40 minutes on a highway every morning and every afternoon. It's just waste of life in general. And trusting people on making sure that you have procedures set up so that you can actually prove that you are getting your tasks done. I think that's the key here.
Yeah, it is.
So I don't agree with the way he works either, but
from what we know.
We know, but I think it depends on personality. There are so many different personalities that need to accommodate. I think those were the questions that we got. 3 questions. Thank you so much.
That's excellent.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Let's go to the beach.
Oh yes, we're ready.